Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We'll just give it another minute or so before we get started. We'll allow a few others to join the session. Okay, I think we should get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Vijay Desaraju. I'm Celonis's Global Oil and Gas Industry Lead, and I'm very excited to bring you today's webinar, Accelerating Order Management Transformation. I'm delighted to be joined today by Richard Goede from ExxonMobil, Automation and Immersive Realities Manager, and Ray Grady, President and CEO from Connexium. We have allocated time for questions at the end of our session, and you'll see a Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. So please be sure to enter any of your questions, and myself and Ray will go through and be sure to ask any of the questions that you pose, time permitting, at the end of the session. With that, Richard, thank you again. If you can share a little bit more about your role at Exxon and maybe some of the driving factors that allowed your organization to prioritize automation, that'd be great to get us kicked off.
Sure thing. So first, thanks for having me. So get a little background on my role. So my role, as you kind of heard the title, has, like others in the world, has multiple aspects. So currently I have three services: the process mining service, the process automation service, the RPA OCR space, and then the immersive reality type areas there. And so the last one, we're kind of transitioning out so I can focus more on our global process transformational activities, where our company is going through a transformational journey where we're combining our business processes to improve our business logic and kind of scalability. So we need to kind of look more at our processes so we can quickly identify what's not working optimally, developing that pipeline of prioritized value, and then of course starting the solutioning, whether it's automating the process, updating governance and documentation, or even fixing the business logic itself.
It's interesting. That's great. And Richard, again, this is, we spent a lot of time together over the last couple of years. So thank you again for doing this. I'm always interested when, at what point does an organization decide, okay, these are no longer point projects, but now we should really standardize this. We should standardize these solutions, and we should build a center of excellence around these things and really get that centralized in an area. So I guess my question would be at what point and what led you to create the center of excellence, and then what steps did you do to get it built and launched and funded and then kind of scaled out throughout the organization?
Sure. Great question, Ray. So a little context. So before we had a COE, each of our business lines sort of embarked on their own journey. And so sometimes they had optimization teams established at the organizational level. Sometimes it was at a process level, or even formed a result of a project. And so while each of these practices were successful in driving the value and the change, the scope they had in place there, but there was probably something more we could go ahead and do. And so we found ourselves where we were, doing businesses, or at least led the possibility of doing businesses with ourselves, and kind of missing out on something larger. So we established a COE, kind of at the bare basis, kind of a facilitation call, and invited many of the leads that we knew of into sessions to just start the overall approach of sharing best practices, information exchanges on a variety of sort of topics there. And so just a little more background. So our global series is IT led. So I'm in the applications group within our company, and we essentially handle the full spectrum of the service, whether it's helping our internal customers with the scope definition, the data ingesting mining, gap modeling, creating dashboards and sort of the initial automation consulting. And so what we're finding as our individual business units and their processes kind of mature in their journey, sometimes they want to scale out faster than what our current capacity, kind of our central COE pool of resources are. So they may build out kind of a sub team, let's just say, where there's a member that attends the larger one, but they're able to go ahead and scale out much faster. And so one example of this is within our chemicals group. They went ahead and really want to focus down on the supply chain. It starts to really get that new levels and obtaining massive value. And so it's been quite exciting to watch their innovation and their love of the business line and just kind of what they can tap into and go ahead. And they keep doing a fantastic job, and pretty soon they'll be delivering all the best practices for the others. But from a COE history, we kind of leverage that sort of things got established for this particular opportunity for within the order management sort of space. So it helps. I can kind of walk through the process we used in a recent order fulfillment improvement process. And so I'll kind of talk about this in a few high level steps so that kind of help the community we're talking to kind of understand that approach. So first of all, the problem. Well, the problem was within our fuel and lubes organization. They were looking at some decisions for a customer self-service portal. They know they want to make some updates. There were some features they wanted to add. They also knew there was probably some optimizations as well they wanted to go ahead and do in the business logic. So that kind of led us to the first stage of it, I guess you would say, which is looking at it from a strategic sort of overview. So we took a look at internal strategies, what was our staffing and support strategy, what existing tools were they using now as part of that process. We compared that against what we had documented from a process model perspective. We looked at what mining data that we had at the particular time to kind of help understand some potential optimization areas, to help understand where some initial areas to help them explore. We also had on our team a value architect with an order to cash background, so they can go ahead and help us understand recent trends that's kind of going on externally from our organization. What are some of the other organizations doing? So it kind of gives us some of those insights as well. And I'll also say, in a side topic, it's probably good to have a good knowledgeable person of various the internal business corporate processes within your COE, so you can go ahead and talk the same language to your overall customer. So after that strategic sort of area, we then started going down to taking sort of an opportunity landscape of quite large and kind of getting down to grouping and prioritization, I would say. So we did some initial classification of areas where there were some initial opportunities with some of the information we had, whether that was from workshops to help explore problem areas, whether that was some of that initial mining data I was talking about, the external benchmarks, talking to a few people. And then we kind of bucketed those areas into like account management, order management, billing, and receiving. And so we continue to refine those areas to kind of continue to kind of narrow it down. Now, based upon those particular sort of areas there, we also started saying, okay, now what's important to our leaders, right? How do they define success? And so we wanted to make sure we incorporated that, because as we went through the refining process, we really want to get down to is what's the value to help determine and what's this made sense. So that helped us define those opportunity areas at a lower level. So now we're looking at areas like late billing, price leakage, manual sales order creations, et cetera. So it helps us kind of continue to narrow down the opportunities. We obviously had to include some additional mining data. We did some weighting overlayings that really help us get down to what are the areas that allows us to get the highest value with the lowest effort. And that allowed us to kind of dive even deeper into those use cases on what's manual, what's touchless areas for various optimization sort of areas there. So hopefully, as I kind of explained how our COE got created, kind of how we took sort of a initial area, and we sort of narrowed it down until we actually got something meaty to help frame up the opportunity, and actually allows us to get to that ways to go ahead and actually, attain that value.
That's interesting. That's an interesting approach that you all have taken. And it's good to, you get that. You always see when you get one business unit or one division as the champion that really can help you get things scaled across other BUs. I had a follow-on question there. I think, from what we've seen across our customer base who are really looking at marrying mining and automation together, it just makes a ton of sense because you can quantify the problem with a hard dollar ROI. And then if you can automate it, you can fix the problem. And I'm curious, how are you and the team? You had talked about, setting out goals and setting out KPIs, but how are you really, in 2023, it's going to be really important to show hard return. How are you measuring success, and how are you showing, positive return, positive results, from the efforts that you and the team are taking within their center of excellence?
Yeah, great question. So I would say that it's, success, that definition is kind of accomplished in sort of a few areas. First, going through and understanding, our internal, customer sort of perspective, right? So as we're, talking with our internal, customers, how they define, success, right? Are they looking specifically as, hey, this is directly translated to, workforce reductions, or maybe this is changing on their KPI, measurements they're currently looking at it. So you really can understand, hey, from our strategic KPIs, what are we looking at? Right. So if we're talking like, manual sales orders, we then can go ahead and say, based upon what the opportunity is and how they're defining success, we're able to go ahead and baseline that into our mining platform. So we have sort of a initial snapshot or strategic values, I guess you would say, of time. And then where are things going as we go through a sort of comparison as we're tracking the optimizations is going. And of course, there's always some variations we have of where we may be leveraging some portals like we have with Connexium to really, take some of the feeds and essentially, roll that up to either a kind of like a control tower sort of command center. So having that visibility in terms of what you're doing makes it become really powerful as you look at those trends across the overall enterprise. And if I was to say outside of that, right, it's also important to kind of, incorporate, the external KPI comparisons in there. And so, because you really have to make that choice of where do you want to position yourself against? Do you want to be tier one in a particular area, or are you okay with being something different? You can't solve everything at once, but it helps give you an understanding in terms of, where are other people in the industry going in terms of how they're achieving, whether that's certain KPIs, and also lets you know where do you really want to differentiate as a company. And then last thing I'll kind of mention in terms of areas of success is there are some of those intangibles, I guess you would say, kind of that softer type stuff there that's also kind of important. And so I'll try to explain it. So I was in a conversation today where a client was wanting to automate some of their documentation for a particular process. And so they were reading, read an article about optical characterization, OCR. It's really pushing, hey, Richard, this would be a great solution for this. And so we got into a great conversation. We started talking about, those source files, and so, where we're saying, where there's some of those benefits of kind of having those conversations, we're saying, what, if the source file is image-based or not image-based, you can go ahead and get it. You can probably use text extraction, which would go ahead and actually give you higher levels of accuracy, and you don't have to go through all that training of the model and associated algorithm. And so it helped us shift the conversations in terms of looking at those source triggers and sort of that higher level of elements of automation. So I think it's success is kind of defined in a certain type of ways, but just kind of having that optimization sort of mindset when you're kind of looking at success, because that even translates to which vendors to work with. Let's say, are you working at it on a single project together, or do you really want to partner up with someone who actually live and breathe this particular work?
Great, awesome. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, Richard, thank you. Truly impressive journey that you've been on. I'm sure you've picked up some lessons learned along the way. Can you share, what are 2 or 3 of the lessons that you learned and that you would want to share with this group?
Sure. And I would say that I'll share a couple of things. But so the first thing I would say is this is a journey, right? This is, when you're looking at optimization, it's not sort of a one-time event. So I love, talking about it's a journey, because the business environment's always changing, right? Your customers, you're supplying the technology. It's never a single event in time. While maybe there was one time you had a great opportunity, but it was not cost effective to do something about it. But maybe in a couple of months it is. And so always having a refreshed backlog. And so always thinking about it from a journey perspective. But getting back to your actual question, so lessons learned, I would say looking at it from a, considering looking at it from a different sort of focus on culture. I would say focusing kind of on your data and thinking about, so from a strategic sort of perspective. So from a culture perspective, there is, as you're going through a transformation and almost kind of going through a digital sort of process, it changes that culture. So that management change is actually going to be good area to kind of focus on, because if I was use a generic answer like, hey, how did you go ahead and do, process workflows in the past? Well, you kind of went through, interviews, sticky notes on side of the walls to understand pain points, et cetera. But then moving to kind of digitally doing it, where maybe you're leveraging your mining platform or using your defined process models to actually go into interview conversations and saying, I'm noticing a gap analysis, or I'm noticing something in a tool based upon the recent histories there. And it helps you understand, right, why maybe something's going differently, or ask those questions on why there are deltas from KPIs in the past, or why is one region internally from one business unit to another doing the same process internally, but they're having different results. So you're allowing you to kind of go into those conversations in a much different sort of fashion than kind of going back to the kind of an old way of sort of analog. So that cultural MOC is sort of a big lessons learned. That the data answer I'll kind of give is something else, whereas I would say as we went through this, don't underestimate, early engagement with your data architects and your BPM organizations, because having that common taxonomy, usage standards, just allows quicker adoption of things. You know where things are at, and as you're doing comparison, you're sort of talking the sort of language, common language type perspective. And I also mentioned kind of looking larger. So I kind of started off with how the COE sometimes are doing before we had COE, a very, very great sort of approach, but sometimes you almost have to take a step look up. Don't look at it from a sort of a great success in these puzzle pieces, but let's look at across the corporation, not so much in a pockets type perspective there. And so I think there's just huge opportunities across probably any companies, where if you don't, have sort of this mindset and type perspective there, then it really helps you get into or almost a lack of competition against some of these smaller to sort of, mid-tier companies where they're starting off fresh, starting in a green field sort of environment versus coming from something where you may have lots of processes and stuff built up over time.
Wonderful. And so, I'm sure you can probably anticipate where I'm going next. So every day we wake up, different headlines in the news. Can you talk a little bit about, how today's macroeconomic trends are influencing, some of the strategic direction that ExxonMobil's taking, and how you're evaluating, efficiency within order management?
Yeah, so another great question. So I would say it greatly impacts. And so, there's lots of geopolitical stuff going on. There's inflation, there's supply chain constraints, labor shortages that have to be factored into when you're looking at your overall process of items there, whether that's just the delay that's causing, the changing of the volume orders that may be happening, the cost of capital changes. It's all driving pressure, right, on our enterprise budgets. And so, being in an IT area, right, the technical talent is key, right? So the attrition, the retirement, the overall capacity and reskilling of all this stuff is kind of crucial. And it has a direct correlation to not only the solutions we have available, but also what the skills we have today and where they're going tomorrow. And then if you take, another step back, this also kind of impacts, or your companies you're working with, right? How is it impacting their practices or their roadmaps, right? Are roadmaps changing? Because there is that follow-on sort of business there. And so just it creates a lot of great opportunities, a lot of challenges, but I say a lot of opportunities as you're going through the process improvements. And so having that journey mindset all helps kind of build on each other, because this stuff is going to go on. So it's kind of having that logical approach to go ahead and address it.
Okay, last one, and then we'll get to some of the Q&A.
Sure.
Again, fantastic journey you've embarked on. Is there one or a few kind of moments that you're most proud of that you and the team, achieved along the way that you can share with the group?
Yeah, I would say without a doubt, I'm proud of our people, right? So we have some truly dedicated people that's kind of embracing the journey. I mentioned, the one at the start, kind of the chemicals was that COE group that kind of really want to kind of go on kind of all in. But there's so many others in our mining and automation sort of areas that not only work on the consulting and engagement piece, but also that platform support, right? Whether testing new feature sites or kind of helping determine, which tool win type perspective there. So I'd say I'm so proud of our people that we have. And their willingness to go through a change and to try something different, and also obviously reap rewards as we go through the journey.
Wonderful. Thank you again for kind of taking us through your journey and some of the best practices, lessons learned. Like I said, we do have some questions from the group, so I will let me tee some of those up for you. First question is, the benefits of connecting process mining and automation are clear. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the intended benefits of connecting process mining with immersive realities?
Yeah. So I would say that taking the logical approach of understanding how your process kind of works type perspective there. So from a immersive reality space, right, you're kind of getting involved in sort of, the virtual reality, augmented reality. So you almost have to take a step back and say, okay, well, how do you get your maybe your unique CAD file, loaded on a headset so you can go ahead and do something? How do you install maybe a custom sort of simulation? So at its bare bones, it's a different sort of technology set, but looking at it from how does the process work? Right? Are you going through utilizing, enterprise tools? Or are you going through and sort of taking individual laptops, doing some side loading process and things of that nature? That kind of gets into, maybe this is an area where you're not looking at process mining, but maybe you're looking at an area where maybe task mining would make sense. So where you're capturing what's going on in the desktop as maybe you load up these particular applications inside the headset. So there's a connection there, but I'd say thinking at it from a logical sort of process optimization approach, you can apply the same mindset to pretty much any particular situation.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Can you talk about how the group's built a standard process taxonomy across the order to cash area? How do you maintain and govern process taxonomy moving forward?
Yeah, I'd say it's a great question. It's kind of like one of those, lessons learned sort of items there. And so I would say that, it's a journey, right? We're going through it. So we have a fantastic group that's really kind of focusing in on that the business process management aspect of really kind of leading in on terms of, what is the right taxonomy to go ahead and use type perspective there? What are those definitions type perspective there? As we're going through our transformation exercises, we're going through and talking with our enterprise process owners to say, what KPIs are important in the future as they are today? How are you defining that? Bringing in the external, benchmarks, picture when you want to use, how are they defining it? And so really having those conversations and going back down is really helping drive, that standard, taxonomy, of course, across the corporation. And that way, as you're rolling up your data to more aggregate sort of views, it makes it that much easier. You're having to do less translation and less, specific calculations if you want to go ahead and capture sort of metrics.
Okay, I think we have time for probably two more. So as it relates to the COE, Richard, how did you, I'm trying to interpret the question here a little bit.
Sure.
How did you establish the COE, or how did you gain support to build a COE in parallel as you were defining, the use cases that you were trying to mine and go after from a Celonis perspective? I believe that's the question.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. So I would say it gets down to, obviously support from your executives, your senior leadership, and your overall, company type perspective there. So, like I was going back from the history perspective. We didn't start off with the COE. We have, various pockets of excellent people looking at optimization processes. And so we were looking at, building that COE, let's just say, and then kind of leveraging mining even more. We started off, just like I said, we had a pain point, a use case to kind of dive into, and we used the tools to help them, understand, what is that potential value, right? The most beautiful thing about, mining is that it takes any bias out of it, right? You're actually using data-driven decisions, let's say that way. So having that helps articulate the case a little bit more to say, hey, look, there's a rich opportunity here to go ahead and actually, optimize that segment of the process. And by doing so, by having a more of a dedicated team, really kind of focusing in on best practice sharing, how the process works, just education on tools themselves, we can go ahead and say, hey, look, there's a whole bunch of opportunities over here. Then bringing in those external pieces as well, saying, hey, look, we heard either an announcement that such and such company had a huge win in a particular area. Imagine if we applied, a set of, process optimization folks on that. So just kind of that journey discussion using data helps drive that need to help say, yes, let's go ahead and form kind of a COE.
Okay. Last one, Richard, as you look ahead to kind of future plans and future initiatives, any changes in approach or in the COE that you have, based on what you've done previously to ensure continued success?
Yeah, I would say that, our customers' expectations, right, continue to change over time, right? And so I will say that, if we're thinking of, external customers, right? So whether they're, they have a decision, right, to whether purchase lubricants from us or one of our competitors. And so, how they order, let's put it that way, could be that key item, whether they're a long-term company or customer of ours, or even a short one. What's that experience? What's the easiness or that complexity of placing that order could be it. So I would say that, constantly understanding, constantly having, ruthless mentality of kind of going through that journey, but understanding that, we're providing a service for external customers. And then, of course, we're also providing a service inside our particular business department so they can be more efficient in terms of how they produce their products and services externally.
Wonderful. Well, Richard, thank you very much for spending time with us today. Appreciate you highlighting the journey and the impact that you've made to drive change at ExxonMobil. Ray, we appreciate the partnership and collaboration with Connexium and look forward to driving continued success. And lastly, to our attendees, we really appreciate you taking time to join today's session, and we look forward to seeing you at a future session again. So thank you very much.
Thank you, VJ. Thank you, Richard.